He screamed so loudly that the guards standing at the door instinctively stepped back. The scream was not human. It was hoarse, ragged, with a gurgling echo as if blood were gushing from his throat. The smell coming from under the sheet they were trying to cover him with was so strong that even people accustomed to foul odors covered their faces with their sleeves. The emperor, who had once held half of Europe in fear, now lay on his side, trembling and muttering incoherent prayers, interspersed with curses directed at his own son. There was no power or reason left in his eyes, only despair and animal alertness, as if he already understood that his death would be neither quiet nor natural. The entire court knew that he was dying. Rumors of his illness had been circulating for more than 6 months, but only those closest to him had seen what it had done to his body. According to the court physician's report, the skin on his legs and stomach had turned black and was peeling off. Ulcers oozed pus with a sharp, sweetish odor. Breathing was difficult. His tongue was swollen and cracked, and his urine was black. He was bled twice a week, his veins cauterized with a red-hot iron, and ointments made of pork fat mixed with crushed garlic and vinegar were applied to the ulcers. When the pain became unbearable, he was given opium, but even under its influence, he often woke up screaming, claiming that dead servants were walking around the room, coming to call him to God's judgment. The emperor's son, the heir to the throne, began to squeeze his father out of power in the spring. Advisors, fearing instability, supported him, arguing that the state needs a ruler in his right mind. Access to the emperor was restricted. Only a few trusted doctors, a confessor, and guards were allowed into his chambers. Even old courtiers who had served for decades were unable to see him. There were increasing whispers that the heir was rushing the end, fearing that his father would change his mind and alter his will. From the notes of the senior squire, the chambers are dark, the windows are curtained. The stench is so bad that the candles burn with a crackling sound. At the foot of the bed is a basin of water with dark clots floating in it. The emperor hardly eats, drinking only wine, mixed with honey and warm water. He has become thin, but his stomach is swollen like a drowned man's. The doctors claimed that this was a buildup of fluid in the peritoneum and tried to drain it through small incisions, but this only intensified the smell and caused the skin around the incisions to decay more quickly. There was talk in the corridors about the strange orders the emperor was giving in his delirium. He demanded the immediate execution of several advisors, suspecting them of poisoning, ordered the burning of letters from foreign ambassadors, and once ordered all the monks of St. Vitus's monastery to be gathered and forced to pray for his soul without interruption until dawn. His confessor, an elderly and gaunt man, said that the sovereign's soul is in turmoil, and the devil is using this turmoil to take control of his mind. They brought him the relics of saints, placed crosses at his bedside, and burned incense, but this only provoked new hysterical cries. He saw in the smoke the faces of the people he had executed. At the same time, the heir began to meet secretly with the commander of the palace guard. According to rumors, they discussed not only strengthening security, but also a plan of action in case of sudden death. Doctors who received generous gifts were already writing reports in which they called the illness incurable and rapidly progressing. Advisors prepared documents that were to come into force as soon as the death was announced. During the same period, several chests of silver disappeared from the treasury, presumably sent to the homes of loyal guards. Servants who had access to the emperor's chambers said that he had become afraid to sleep. He asked for the candles to be left lit, demanded that a man with a sword stand guard at his bedside, and fell asleep, clutching the hilt of his own dagger. Sometimes he would wake up screaming and grab his guards by the arms, begging them not to bury him alive. These words would later become key in the case, but at the time, no one paid any attention to them, believing them to be the ravings of a madman. By midsummer, his body was so ravaged by disease that he could not sit without pain. His eyelids were swollen. Pus ran down his cheeks, and his hands trembled so much that he dropped his wine cup. Every meal ended in vomiting. His confessor asked him to repent of his sins, but he only spat to the side and called himself the Chosen One, whom God will forgive everything. Only occasionally, in moments of weakness, did he speak quietly. "They will come at night, and I will hear everything when the earth falls on the lid." At the beginning of autumn, the heir ordered the number of guards at the doors to be doubled, explaining that there was a danger of rebellion. But among the servants, there was no longer any doubt that the emperor's days were numbered. Secret reports found many years later stated, "Prepare a lead coffin. Close the lid in the presence of witnesses. Do not allow it to be opened." The night when everything was to be decided began in silence. No bells rang in the palace, no guards called out to each other, and the servants moved about like shadows. Dozens of candles burned in the emperor's chambers, but the light did not dispel the darkness. The walls were saturated with the stench of rot and medicinal ointments. He lay almost motionless, barely breathing. His eyelids were half closed, his mouth slightly open, his lips cracked. The doctors assured them that he had no will to live, but the guards standing by his bed saw that he sometimes moved his fingers slightly, as if trying to grab the blanket. The heir entered closer to midnight. His face was calm, but his gaze was piercing. Behind him were the commander of the guards and two close advisors. The physician bowed and whispered that his heart is beating weakly. He will not live to see dawn. The heir nodded and ordered preparations to begin. In the palace, this phrase had long been understood to mean not medical treatment, but what must follow immediately after death. According to the secret notes of one of the guards, who was later accused of complicity, we knew he was still breathing, but the order was clear: put him in a coffin and close the lid. The doctor signed the death certificate, even though I saw his chest rise slightly. The emperor was dressed in funeral garb, a long white shirt and a red cloak, a symbol of power. His body could barely be turned. His joints were swollen and inflamed, and any touch caused convulsions. Pus oozed from open wounds, staining the fabric, but no one dared to change his clothes. They were in a hurry. Before placing him in the coffin, the confessor approached the headboard. He whispered words of absolution, but the emperor opened his eyes. His lips trembled, and he said hoarsely, "Don't bury me. I can hear." Then his head fell limply onto the pillow. Witnesses claimed that these were his last words. The coffin had been prepared in advance, thick lead walls, lined with black velvet, and a lid with locks. When the body was laid in the coffin, the heir ordered that the seams be immediately sealed with lead to prevent the stench from escaping. According to one of the craftsmen who worked that night, he clearly heard a faint, wheezing sound from inside while sealing the coffin, but glancing at the guard commander, he silently continued his work. The funeral took place without the participation of the people. The coffin was carried out at night. Under the cover of torches and guards, there was not a single extra shadow on the streets. The gates were closed so that no one could see the procession. The emperor was buried in the crypt of the cathedral, behind thick oak doors, locked with 3 locks. The monks who served at the cathedral were ordered not to open them without special orders from the throne. The next morning, the court was filled with news of the sovereign's peaceful death. The advisors proclaimed the heir the new emperor without waiting for the funeral ceremonies. Orders were read out, replacing some military leaders and transferring funds from the treasury to strengthen the borderlands. But rumors began to spread. One of the servants who helped carry the coffin told a tavern that he saw the emperor move his hand as he was being laid to rest. A monk on duty in the crypt claimed that on the first night he heard muffled blows coming from under the stone slab, but was afraid to report it. These stories quickly spread to the streets, causing fear and anger. The first weeks of the new reign were tense. Supporters of the old nobility, fearing drastic changes, accused the heir of murder. Ambassadors from some principalities hinted that if evidence of such a crime were found, it would be difficult to recognize the new emperor's authority. The Catholic clergy in Rome received letters requesting an investigation, but no official response was ever given. Meanwhile, the emperor's body became a political tool. The heir refused to allow a public autopsy, citing the sanctity of the deceased's rest. Any mention of his last days was punished as slander. Several witnesses disappeared or were found dead, some drowned in the river, others accidentally thrown from the fortress walls. A secret report from Bavaria, dated that winter, stated, "They say that sounds can be heard in the crypt and that monks cross themselves when they pass by. The people are convinced that the sovereign has risen to take revenge." It was these rumors that would form the basis for the rebellion that would begin a few months later. But for now, the new emperor's power was based on fear, gold, and the iron grip of his guards. The winter was harsh, which heightened the anxiety in the capital. The streets were deserted by evening, and people spoke in hushed tones in the taverns. But the talk about the emperor being buried alive did not subside. On the contrary, it became bolder. Rumors grew in detail. Some swore they had seen footprints in the snow near the crypt doors. Others claimed to have heard a long moan when the night bells rang in the cathedral. These stories reached the ears of the old nobility, who found in them a convenient tool against the new ruler. In letters sent to a neighboring principality, one of the Margraves wrote, "The people whisper that the emperor was alive when he was lowered into the coffin. If this is true, the current ruler is not his son, but a murderer. Such a sin must not go unpunished by God." These words became the pretext for secret meetings, where not only the moral, but also the political aspects of the issue were discussed. The old vassals understood that if the heir began his reign with the murder of his father, he was ready to do anything to keep the throne. Nervousness reigned in the palace itself. The guards were ordered not to let anyone except the clergy into the cathedral, and new monks personally loyal to the emperor were sent to the monastery that held the keys to the crypt. Several former brothers were sent to remote monasteries. However, it was among the simple servants of the temple that new terrible rumors began to spread. One of them, an old cleric, claimed that during his night watch, he heard a distinct scratching on the stone, and after that, he was ill with a fever for a week and could not speak. Among the people, these stories were intertwined with memories of the last years of the old ruler. Those who still remembered him in his prime said that even in his illness he retained a sharp mind and an iron will. Many did not believe in a peaceful death and were ready to swear that he could have survived his illness if his son had not intervened. In the markets and taverns, toasts began to be heard to the one who sleeps but will rise again. At this time, armed troops began to arrive in the capital from the borderlands. Formally, they were following the new emperor's order to strengthen the capital's security, but the old courtiers saw this as a hidden threat. Some of the commanders openly hinted that they were ready to change sides if evidence of murder appeared. One such hint proved fatal. A fragment of a note, written by the court craftsman who had sealed the coffin, fell into the hands of the opposition. It read, "The lid shook while we were working, and I saw it rise from inside. But the order was to work quickly and silently." The note was copied dozens of times and circulated throughout the city. By spring, it was known to almost all segments of the population. The new emperor's reaction was immediate. He ordered the arrest and execution of several people suspected of spreading rumors. The executions were carried out in the central square without trial. The bodies were left hanging for several days as a warning. But instead of fear, this caused even more hatred. People whispered that he feared his dead father more than his living enemies. From a report by a secret agent in a neighboring principality, the situation in the capital is heating up. Many nobles no longer hide their contempt for the ruler. Rumors of the emperor's live burial are being used to undermine his authority. They say the conspiracy is already close. In March, the conspiracy took shape. It was led by two old advisors who had been stripped of their positions under the new ruler. The plan was simple: raise the people, demand that the coffin be opened, and a public trial held. If this was refused, the emperor would be removed by force. They were joined by the commanders of two garrisons and, in secret, by some members of the clergy who believed that the murder of one's father was a mortal sin for which one must pay. Everything was decided on the night when a fire broke out in the cathedral. Officially, it was said to be an accident caused by a candle, but people in the city were convinced that the fire had been set deliberately to cover up traces of the opening of the crypt. No one ever found out whether the conspirators managed to reach the coffin. The fire was quickly extinguished, but the doors of the crypt were sealed with new seals, and the entrance to the cathedral was blocked. After that, arrests followed one after another. Several nobles disappeared without a trace, and garrisons lost their commanders. But rumors that the coffin had been opened and a body with a contorted face and a distorted scream had been seen inside could no longer be stopped. Spring brought not only a thaw to the capital, but also open discord among the authorities. It seemed that a little more and the entire Holy Roman Empire would be plunged into turmoil. Despite the repression, rumors of the old emperor's live burial did not disappear. On the contrary, they became a weapon used by the new ruler's opponents. Now they spoke not only of the sin of the son, but also of the curse of the family that had supposedly befallen the throne. In the remote lands of the empire, governors stopped following orders from the capital. In some cities, coins were minted without the name of the new emperor. In one of the northern principalities, it was openly proclaimed in church that the true sovereign sleeps in the crypt and will return when God sends a sign. To superstitious peasants, This sounded like a promise of a miracle soon to come, and to the nobility, it was a convenient excuse not to pay taxes or send troops to serve. In June, a riot broke out in the capital. It was started by artisans and mercenaries who had not been paid. Shouting, "Open the coffin!" the crowd broke through to the cathedral, but was met by armed guards. Dozens of people were killed in the street fighting, including a monk who, according to rumors, had the old keys to the crypt. On the same day, the new emperor ordered troops to take to the streets and declared a state of siege. From a report by a secret court scribe, the supreme ruler is gloomy and irritable. He suspects everyone, even those close to him. During meals, he keeps his sword next to his cup. He does not sleep at night, orders torches to be lit in the corridors and the guards to be changed twice a night. Sometimes he suddenly orders the guards to unlock the doors of the crypt, but when he approaches the entrance, he turns back. They say he is afraid to see that the coffin is empty. The situation worsened when the army of one of the Margraves, once loyal vassals of the late emperor, approached the capital. Formally, they arrived to defend the throne, but on the very first day, their officers met with representatives of the old nobility. The city was threatened with siege, and many understood that the only way to avoid bloodshed was to depose the ruler. Rumors of a conspiracy within the palace became reality on the night of July 24th. Guards bribed by the conspirators allowed armed men into the emperor's chambers. According to the official version, he was found dead in his bed from suffocation caused by a fever. But among the servants, it was said that he died with his eyes open and a look of horror frozen on his face, as if he had seen someone who had come for him. Some whispered that before his death, he raved and screamed that he could hear knocking from under the ground. Immediately after his death, the old emperor's coffin was removed from the crypt and opened. What was found inside was never officially announced. Church court records, preserved only in copies, claimed that the body was untouched by decay, but the face looked like it was suffering, and the fingers were clenched into a fist, as if he were knocking. This document was quickly banned, and copies were ordered to be burned. The new ruler, chosen from among the old nobility, declared that the sin had been washed away with blood and ordered a solemn funeral for both emperors, in different tombs and 3 days apart. The people were allowed to attend the funeral of the old ruler, and hundreds of people weeping threw handfuls of earth into the grave. For many, this was not so much a farewell as a symbolic oath of allegiance to the new authorities. The political consequences were swift. Cities that refused to recognize the authority of the former emperor returned to the empire. However, a schism occurred in religious life. Part of the clergy declared that the former ruler, buried alive, had become a martyr, and pilgrims began to flock to his grave. The cathedral where the coffin was kept became a place of prayer and secret vows. Rome tried to ban this veneration, but to no avail. The people saw it as a sign of divine punishment for the tyrants. Years later, the chronicles wrote, "The death of a father at the hands of his son destroyed the throne, but strengthened the people's faith in God's judgment." The old nobility regained its influence, and the incident itself became a parable that power gained through betrayal always ends in fear and blood. Thus, the death of one emperor buried alive and the death of his son marked the beginning of a new era, an era where the fear of the earth closing over the coffin became stronger than the fear of the crown.